everyone, I'm Dr. Ryan Sinclair. I made this video to discuss externalities in the public health context. An externality is a concept from economics. An externality is defined as benefits or costs gained that were not anticipated by the person experiencing them. This applies well to public health because many of the contaminants and health threats that we are exposed to are from sources external to our own lives and our own experience. To illustrate this example, I'm reviewing a video from a prominent YouTuber educator known as Mr. Clifford. I'm doing this because the video has a couple of very good examples to illustrate what an externality is. I'll stop the video and jump in with my comments as they tie directly to public health.
Hey, how you doing, econ students? This is Mr. Clifford. Welcome to ACDC Econ. Right now we're going to talk about the externalities and the role of the government. Like you, I'm worried about the whole idea of global warming. And so I want to sign a petition that's going to end pollution. That's right, we're going to get pollution down to zero. No pollution at all. And it turns out that that's extremely stupid. There's no way to have zero pollution. I mean, think about it. Our bodies pollute. Everything we do pollutes. And so the question is not should we have pollution or no pollution. The real question is how much pollution. And pollution is a good example of an externality. An externality is when there's external cost or benefits to someone other than the person who's involved in the transaction.
So he just defined that for us again. He said the cost or benefit experienced by someone who was not involved in the transaction. So again, an externality is defined as benefits or costs gained that were not anticipated by the person experiencing them. He's going to go on now and he's going to talk about cigarettes and Coke, and those are really good examples, and we'll talk some more about that as well.
A great example is cigarettes. The free market assumes the people who smoke cigarettes and produce cigarettes pay all the costs of smoking cigarettes. But it turns out there's all these external costs on other people. There's that disgusting smell that other people have to tolerate, and of course there's cigarette butts, which is the most littered item in the world. And of course there was that girl you made out with when you were 16 that just totally smelled like cigarettes, which was disgusting. She was like totally going for it. Like, back off, stinky. Anyways, the point is cigarettes are a great example of an externality. Here's another great example from my home state of California. To decrease childhood obesity, California schools decided to ban soda. And they got rid of all the soda machines so students couldn't buy soda at school. So just like they do with pollution and cigarettes, the government decided to mitigate the negative externality associated with sugary drinks. And we can show this concept using a graph. Right here we have the marginal social benefit and the marginal social cost of soda. The marginal social benefit shows you how much society benefits from additional amounts of soda. The marginal social cost includes the cost of producing soda, but also any external costs on society. And together, marginal social benefit and marginal social cost set the socially optimal quantity. The government established the law to ban soda sales at schools because they thought the free market was producing right here.
So he's talking about marginal social costs and marginal social benefits. And this is, again, those benefits and costs and externality that the person who's making the transaction isn't experiencing. This is for the other people that are outside. So these marginal social costs and benefits are not unique to the field of economics. These topics, they tie over to public health. When we start discussing the environmental health risk assessment framework, you can really begin to understand how risk and cost-based decisions are made for virtually every contaminant and public health experience that we know. The US EPA, the CDC, and the FDA use this approach to find the safe and dangerous levels of contaminants. There are daily occurrences of contaminants in the environment, from legacy industrial pollution and even some naturally occurring environmental contaminants.
The free market that ignored external costs was producing a quantity that's way greater than the socially optimal quantity. And this will result in dead weight loss. These are units of soda that are being produced that the benefit is less than the cost. So the government established a law to get kids to consume the socially optimal amount of soda. Depending on your views, you might be thinking this is a little heavy-handed. Should the government, or does the government even have the power to tell us what we should and shouldn't drink?
Okay, so that was funny. One great example of marginal costs is the Exide Battery plant and the lead contamination in Vernon, California. The Exide Battery company is like that free market that ignored external costs. They produced too much of a quantity and ended up contaminating the soil and putting public health in jeopardy. The company experienced fines and loss of profitability. In addition to this, the general society experienced an external cost when children are found with elevated blood levels. Now, I'm going to show you some of that from the website here. This is in the LA Times. It's a pretty good write-up about what we know about the largest toxic cleanup, thousands of LA County homes tainted with lead. So here's the Los Angeles Times news article, and you can see here where it happened, and that, you know, this is a map with red being more lead contamination detected in kids per census tract. So that's a pretty scary thing, and that's a big social cost to these kids out there. And these kids that live around here are not necessarily these kids that, here's LA from the Google map view. Here's California. We're over here in Loma Linda, Redlands, but then we come down the 10, Freeway 10, over here and land in the middle of LA. Vernon is just LA. And in 2010, according to Google, it had only 112 people living there. But everywhere around, if you look at this New York Times or LA Times map, everywhere around here had lots of lead in the soil, and also lots of lead in children, blood lead levels. So the company actually paid $2 million and some other fines and fees, but they're still in business. So ultimately, oh, and here's the company front porch. I went there from the Google Street View. You can see that they used to have a sign up here, but this is where the contamination actually took place. This is a satellite view. You can see this is a really industrial zone, and when you look at this on Google, it actually says Exide Company Technologies, and this is closed. So the new Exide operation actually isn't in Vernon, California anymore. It's moved to farther away from there, actually a couple cities over, or a city over. Anyway, let's get back to the video I was reviewing.
The government tells you what you can and can't drink all the time. If you're under 21, you can't legally drink.
So again, he's talking again about Coke, and he's talking about how a ban on Coke would be something responding to externality in the schools. He's had that example with Coca-Cola and banning soft drink dispensers in the schools, and he's talking about that.
Alcohol. If you're a restaurant, you can't serve people toilet water, and the government decides what pollutants are appropriate to be in your water supply, which brings us back to the whole idea of pollution. The government uses marginal analysis, right? They don't decide your water can be completely contaminated or it can be no contaminants.
They call it, in economics, they call it marginal analysis. In public health, we call it a risk assessment. And when we do that risk assessment, it's going to consider the risk of health and how many people are going to be exposed.
100% clean. They have to decide what's an appropriate amount of contaminants that can be in our water, or in our lungs, or in our schools. And whether you like it or not, libertarians, it is...
Okay, that libertarians quip, that's my cue to talk more about this. So let's determine how they actually make those decisions, how the government that he's talking about, how the government actually makes those decisions to have that appropriate amount of contaminants. So this ties over really well into my public health risk assessment PowerPoint. So I'm going to bring that up. Okay, so if you look at this figure from my risk assessment PowerPoint, the y-axis is the percent response, while the x-axis is the amount of contaminant. So this is the y-axis here. This is the percent of a response, a dose response. This is actually a dose response curve, and this is the amount, the dose received per milligram of the contaminant, whatever that is, whether it be lead or Coca-Cola or whatever other contaminant you can imagine, per kilogram body weight. So for a kid or for an adult, that's 80 kilograms or more, like me, or per day. Anyway, so this is the percent response over here on the y-axis, and this is the x-axis over here, and that the x-axis has those concentrations of the dose that is received, and percent is response in terms of what the actual illness response is. Our government actually has a regulatory amount of pollution that we are allowed to be exposed to for everything. Some things aren't yet described. Some things like mold or lead, they have no real guidelines. Well, for mold, they don't have any real guidelines for that. For lead, there's any detectable amount will trigger a public health response. But these studies are done, these risk assessment studies are done to determine the concentrations are actually done on animals or by using retrospective human studies. we first find the no observed adverse effect level, we apply some modifying factors and a dose of conservatism, and that brings us down to this reference dose. So let me go through that again. So if you look here, this is the no observed effect level, and this is the lowest observed adverse effect level. So there's this graph here, this line here, and so these are points that they measured in, say, either a rat that they exposed to a certain contaminant or chemical, or a retrospective study where they went back and they looked at the type of contamination, the type of exposure that was experienced in the population. So this lowest observed adverse effect level, that one way up there, that's where there's an adverse effect that was actually experienced by somebody over here, and there was a response, so the percent response is there. But what we do to get it conservative, we go down, where's the no observed adverse effect level? So from the data that they have, they might have other data that is up here, the data points are up here, so that they can interpolate a graph line down using just a simple, usually it's just a simple equation modeling to do that. And then you get the line down here, and then you can say that would be the NOAL. So underneath the NOAL, you might have other points and things, but what you want to do when you're setting these standards, when your government is determining what the risk for health is actually they go way below the no observed adverse effect level, and they call it the reference dose, the RFD. And that is usually what they base the standards on. We apply the modifying factors and other things, that brings us down to that. So then, for example, with arsenic in drinking water, in Coachella, the maximum contamination level by the government used to be 50 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter. But then after some more health studies came out, they lowered it down to 10 micrograms per liter, making it more protective. Okay, so overall, we see that our government has some role in protecting us from externalities through thresholds and maximum concentration levels. And if you put it in the term of an economist, you would say marginal costs and marginal benefits. Anyway, these items are meant to prevent harm in society while allowing industrial and commercial interests to develop. There's a lot of other implications here, but I'll leave you with that for now, and I'll sign off.